414 Live, welcome. Thanks for coming out. And for those of you listening on the radio, welcome to our 414 Live session with the Koch Marshall Trio. You're listening to the Koch Marshall Trio on 414 Live on 88.9 Radio Milwaukee. Keep it going for the Koch Marshall Trio. Maybe you guys can come back next week when you can play. Try to wipe the smile off my face. Welcome, Greg. I've not had you on, so it's good to have you. I know you've been on the show before, but it was before my time, so thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having us. It's a pleasure.
So the album is Toby Arrives. Toby has arrived.
He has indeed.
Toby is from Minneapolis. Explain how that all came to be, because I'm sure there's Hammond B3 players in Milwaukee, but you got one from Minneapolis.
Well, my son Dylan here, the youngster, had been going up to do some gigs around the Twin Cities area with a young guitar player by the name of Dylan Sulphur, a young, fiery axeman of his own right. And my son would go up and do gigs, and he'd always come back saying, "Dad, you got to hear this B3 player up in Minneapolis." I'm like, "Well, that's great, son. That's about 5 hours away from here. So I don't know what good this does me, but I'm glad you're having a good old time." So then one day he says, "Hey, Toby's coming to town. He's buying a Leslie speaker from John Kames. I think we should get together and jam." And I'm like, outstanding. Just what I want to do on one of my days off when I'm not traveling is to get together and jam with Dylan's friends. You know what I'm saying? So I was a little less than enthusiastic about the situation, but he's like, "This guy's really good. We should play with Bernard Allison. He's a demon." I'm like, "Okay." So finally it's getting closer and closer and closer to the day. He's coming in town like on a Thursday. So it's like Wednesday. "Dad, Toby's coming tomorrow. What are we doing about it?" I go, "Well, I got that keyboard thing in the basement. Why don't we just find time tomorrow when he gets into town and we'll go down there, we'll make some noise." He's like, "Dad, he's not gonna play that piece of crap. He plays Hammond B3. I was like, "Well, what is it you suggest?" He goes, "I think we should move it. He's gonna bring it along. We should bring it in the house, move the furniture around the front room and just set up right there and jam." I was like, "Oh, your mom's gonna dig that." Let's move all the furniture around to the hardwood floors and bring this appliance of destruction in there and make a giant scratch on the floor and say, "Hey, that's where we were jamming with Toby, you know, Dylan's friend." So in lieu of not engaging in some kind of marital angst, I called up the studio, the day of actually. I called up my buddy, Steve Hamilton, who has a studio in town here, and I knew he had a B3 wired up and ready to go in a drum kit. I said, "Steve, are you around today?" He's like, yeah. I go, "Toby's coming to town." He's like, "Who's Toby?" I was like, "Never mind. He's coming to town. And we want to jam." He's a B3 guy. He's like, "No problem. Come over around 2:30. I'll have everything mic'd and ready to go." And he goes, "And we can record it." I'm like, "You're kidding me." So we go over there. Toby comes to town. I was like, "Hey, Toby, nice to meet you. We're going to go jam." So we go over to the studio. We set up. I brought a guitar along on an amp. I plugged in. We got a couple little sounds. And I said, "Well, let's just play like a shuffle in G." So I counted it off. We started playing. And that first moments of us playing is captured. And it's the first track on our record, which just got released on Mascot Label Group's Players Club label, which is really cool. So it's been released internationally. What happened in West Dallas stays in West Dallas usually, but not in this case.
Wow. That's a story. Now I don't have to ask any more questions. So what is it about Toby's playing that makes him irreplaceable to you?
Well, the idea of an organ trio to me is a lot of people go, "Where's the bass player?" Well, in a traditional organ trio, the bass player is the organist, right? And to find somebody in this day and age that is that committed to being an organ player, I mean,
He took a shoe off.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's accoutrements involved and taken away. So, yeah, he's like, you know, he can play piano and all that, but he's like, "I'm an organ player." So I find as a player, what he can do as a bass player alone and locking in, just instinctively what he comes up with groove-wise is like perfect. And then he can comp like a demon and play all the chords, and he solos like a Sasquatch in heat, and I don't even know what that means. and then, of course, you got the fact that it's all the same guy.
Yeah.
And what's really awesome about the whole thing is you know, in the music world, you know, you meet some idiosyncratic personalities, and he's not a psychopath, which is really a plus.
That's
so
a
he
bonus.
plays great. He's dedicated to the craft, and well, as far as I know, in the trips that we've been on, I haven't had any organs harvested, so no pun intended. See what I did there?
And you know, I saw Steve Winwood this weekend, and he's pretty decent on the B3 as well.
Yeah.
He didn't take a shoe off. So I'm just saying, advantage Toby.
Advantage Toby.
They did have a bass player, but he also played some bass notes, so advantage Toby. Just take it, Toby. So Greg, you have your son Dylan in the band.
Yes.
At what point were you A, disappointed they didn't take up the guitar, and B, you thought, you know what, this kid can actually play, and he's good enough to play in my band? When did that happen?
Well, you know, he gravitated towards the drums very early. It was a little weird. he used to go into the kitchen and grab like soup spoons and whatnot, and music would be on, and he would just like pretend he was playing drums, and he would instinctively know where starts and stops were, even with songs that he had never heard before. And my musician friends would be over and be shooting the breeze, and out of the corner of their eye, they're going, "What's with the kid?" I was like, "I don't know," you know. And then, you know, we got him a little bitty drum set that he would bash around, like when he was like 3 or 2 or something. He had one pretty early on, but it wasn't until he was in 5th grade that he really started taking it seriously. And he started playing with a bunch of different groups, some young guitar prodigy. Well, Talon Latz was one of them, and Jared James Nichols, and these types of guys. But for my band, I think we were playing at Tosa Fest in beautiful Chronic Wauwatosa, my hometown. And my trio was playing, and Dylan was going to sit in, and I said, "Hey, you guys, do you mind if Dylan plays a song?" And the drummer's like, "Sure, that's cool." And the bass player, Tom, was looking at me like, "Yeah, I guess, you know." And so Dylan comes up, and I go, "What tune do you want to play?" He goes, "I want to play Message to Love by Jimi Hendrix." For those of you who are not familiar, it's a tune off the Band of Gypsies record, and Buddy Miles played drums, and it's not an easy song to play. It's got all kinds of weird little sections, and it's a beast. And he came up, and he annihilated it. And actually, someone put it on YouTube, and it's got a bunch of views from the peeps. But I knew right then and there, I was like, you know what, the kid can rock like a demon. So, and then just from there, he just gravitated, like, you know, I was saying this the other day when somebody was talking to me about Dylan's playing, and, you know, I was like, this is not a nepotism situation. I mean, I'm glad that he's my kid and I don't have to pay him. What? But, I mean, groove-wise, he instinctively comes up with things that I would ask somebody to do, but he just does them. I mean, that doesn't say that, you know, occasionally I don't go, "Hey, can you do this or do that?" But, you know, just, and his influences are not just stuff I listen to, but, you know, he percolated off into his own things, which all kind of tie into the stuff. And so it's kind of weird. It's great. I mean,
it's awesome.
It's like, hey, the kid can rock. And what about that hair? Let's talk about that.
Applause for hair. So, one of the things I like about you, Greg, and our mutual friend Willie Porter is that you managed to stay in town, plying your trade as musicians by staying in Milwaukee. You still go all over the world and play, but home is Milwaukee.
It is, yes. Thank you.
And that's impressive to me, because I've seen plenty of bands leave and get, you know, degrees of success after they left here, and bands that have stayed here and not. But you've stayed here, and yet you still, you know, you remain here despite maybe getting tempted to go to the coasts.
Well, I think because I always wanted to have my own band, and I always wanted to do my own music, the temptation to go elsewhere to try to hook up as a sideman with various different bands and so on and so forth was never a top priority of mine. And back in the day, my rationale was, well, if I, you know, can work up to some kind of a reputation in my hometown, that'll always be my insurance policy. So I can make forays into wherever else and always come back home and work as a musician doing my own thing. Kind of, I hate to use that term, but establish my brand in the hometown. And for the more, you know,
you've done it.
For more or less, it's worked out. So it's great. I mean, I get to travel all over the place, and you know, it is tempting when you go out to, you know, Los Angeles or wherever else, and you're meeting all your idols, and they know who you are now, and they come up and they say stuff, and you're like, "You're kidding me!" And then you remember, "Oh, that's right, the internet." You know what I mean? And then you come back home, and you're like, "I'm just back home in Milwaukee again, and I'm just Dylan, John, Isla, and Grace's dad again." You know, that's pretty much how most of the parents know me. They don't know what I do, which is kind of cool.
Kind of nice. A little degree of anonymity there. It wouldn't be me if I didn't ask a gear question. I hear you have a signature Greg amp.
I do indeed. There's this amplifier company from Holland with the same last name as mine. And I've always known about them. I always knew they made good stuff. And I was in Germany at a music convention doing some stuff, and their booth was right across the way. And Dolph Koch came over to me with his wife and said, "We're big fans of the band, and yada, yada, yada. We got some of your CDs." I'm like, "Oh, that's unbelievable. You know, your amps are great. I know they're great. Wouldn't that be funny if we worked together, you know?" And so they lent me an amp to work to use while I was over there, and I loved it. I mean, I just genuinely thought, man, this thing sounds great, and check out the name. It's fabulous. So then we started talking about maybe doing a signature amp. So I gave them a recipe of stuff that I would want on the amplifier, and they made it happen, and it's magnificent. So I don't have it here yet. They're gonna start shipping at the end of March, early April. But when they were thinking, what should we call the amp? I said, well, we already got the last name in place, so let's just call it the Greg.
I love it.
So away we went. So those are gonna be available all over the place, and it's really cool.
Well, the model I saw had like robin's egg blue toe lacs.
Yes.
Are they all gonna be like that?
Yes, Sonic Blue is my jam.
Excellent. Speaking of jams, let's get one more from the Koch Marshall Trio on 4 on 4 Live.
Yes, Dave.
Keep it going for him, my God. Koch Marshall Trio. Those are all selections from the new record. And you'll be playing at Shank Hall at the end of this month to celebrate this, right?
That is correct. On March 30th, we're going to be playing, as to celebrate the release of the new record, Toby Arrives. And our buddy David Grissom is coming up, great guitar player from Austin, Texas. We're also going to do a workshop the very next day at Cream City Music for all you guitar fiends. So check out the website for details.
That's right, and you're doing all my work. I was going to mention you're such a pro. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's hear it again for the Koch Marshall Trio.
Thank you.
4 and 4 Live is presented by the Milwaukee Bucks with support from Hi-Hat Lounge in the Garage and the Prairie School. We want to thank our live engineers. We have Dan and Mike working for us today, so thank you to them. Thank you to all our members who make this all possible. I'm going to send it back to Josh in the studio on 88.9 Radio Milwaukee.